All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the final session of the PUC 911 program 2025 GIS series. We're happy to have you here, and thanks for sticking with us to the end. This is going to be a Q&A session that's hopefully very interactive, so I hope you guys brought your questions. But we're going to start off first with, I will call on each of our subject matter experts to introduce themselves. And then we've collected all the questions that were asked throughout the series over the summer. So I'm going to pose those questions to the original presenters so that we can capture them here. Then we will have time for open questions. So any question you have about GIS in 911, now is the time to ask while we have all of our subject matter experts gathered into one place. And we will go from there. So I'm just going to go in order of the people I see on my screen. And Sandy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. My name is Sandy Stroud. I am the Public Safety Director at One Spatial, and happy to be here and looking forward to providing any support, answering any questions you may have.
Thank you, Sandy. Jeffrey Young.
Uh, Sorry, I was muted. It's great to see everybody, and I hope this will be a very educational session for all participants. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Carrie Brennan.
Hi, I'm Carrie Brennan. I'm subject matter expert with Geocom. Happy to be here, and I'll be answering any questions on indoor or really outdoor GIS for you.
Awesome. Thank you. And Jessica, is it Byerman? And if I got that right, please feel free to correct me.
You got it right. Thanks. Yep. Jessica Byerman. I'm with Geocom as well. I'm a GIS solutions engineer, and I was the one that did the presentation that the recording didn't quite work out. So that's why if you think of any questions that came up during that you'd like to ask again, I'm yeah, here to answer them. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Jessica, and a special shout out to Jessica because she did agree graciously to re-record her session after I mistakenly assumed that we were on auto record. So thank you very much. Lauren DiGiovanni.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Lauren DiGiovanni. I'm a client success manager with Datamark Technologies, and I'm excited to participate today. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you. And Greg Brooks. I think I saw you sneak in here.
Oh, hey, yeah. Lauren will be the smart one for us. I'm at a conference in Washington. It's break right now, so I'll listen in, and if I can add something, I will.
No problem. Did I miss any of our subject matter experts? We have a large group, and so I have a split screen.
Jennifer, we've got Becky Nordine from Geocom on as well.
Thank you. Becky, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Becky Nordine. I am a GIS solutions engineer at Geocom, working alongside with Jessica and Carrie. So looking forward to being here and answering some questions.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Any other GIS subject matter experts to introduce themselves?
We may be having another person from Datamark jump on, but they're not available just yet. So just heads up.
No problem. And I know that there's a lot of conferences going on and events going on. So we will welcome anybody coming in throughout the session. And if you see them sneak in, and if I don't see them, then go ahead and remind me and we'll get some introductions made. So thank you so much. All right, so our first session this year was all the way back in May, and One Spatial presented on the NENA i3 standard and an update on the NENA Next-Gen 911 standards development process. So the first question we had in that session was, what about service areas in fire districts dual jurisdictions? How do you deal with that, and how do PSAP or districts need to submit boundary data in a special way to ensure dual jurisdiction areas are respected? So I believe that would be Sandy.
Yeah, and I'll start off by saying I apologize ahead of time because there really is not a straightforward answer. Maybe some of my colleagues can answer this too. So right now, service areas are not, this is not information that is actually delivered with the 911 call. So when we think about the information that's delivered with a 911 call, we have to think about information that is tied to PIDFFLOW, which is the object, the XML object that is actually it packages up all that good location information, and it's delivered with a 911 call in the header of the SIP file. So if there's no space or spot within PIDFFLOW to send that information, it's actually something that is provided upon a rebid. So that's actually done as an ADR, which is an additional data repository, which is a little bit different. So how you handle it really depends upon how the systems that you procure can accept that information and share that information. So I think that, and it's not that uncommon because, you know, where I used to be in Minnesota, you would have a local PD would only be the primary for business hours. And then after hours, you would have, say, a sheriff's department that was the primary on call for those areas. So it really takes the ability to maintain those Polygon files, but also have extra information in there that can be queried so that you have a better understanding of who is primary, possibly when, or even possibly based upon the nature of the call. I hope that answers the question.
I think so, but does anybody have a follow-up question or thoughts for Sandy?
And I would open this up to anyone who also maybe Jennifer wants to answer some of that. I know we've got a lot of really smart experts on the call too.
All right, throwing it out to the virtual panel then.
I think, so as I understand it, typically for those, because we hear about this a lot for, you know, dual aid and mutual aid, you know, completing your data to the best of your ability. So indicating, you know, even though the one might not be primary technically, at least indicating one of the first responder agencies in that field. And then as I understand it, the next gen core services can be configured to support a dual aid, mutual aid situation. So just to piggyback on what Sandy's saying.
Awesome, thank you. All right, the next question is from the next session, which was OneSpatial's presentation on the NENA NextGen 911 GIS Data Transition Guide. And so Sandy, you're up again. And the question was, are all of the legacy and or conditional attributes going to be required by data model version 3 or only a select set of them?
So data model number 3, I'll actually just pull it up and look because I do have a version of it. But it is not finalized yet. I would highly recommend though that even if it is something that is considered conditional by NENA or even by a state data model, because there's a lot of states that have a data model that they were produced to. I would definitely urge you to understand the purpose of those data elements and how they are used by a core service provider, especially when you are transitioning to core services. So I say that because a lot of core service providers are going to need those elements in order to produce a geospatially derived MSAG from your GIS data. There is a lot of value to do that. If we cannot create a geospatially derived MSAG from your road center line and address point, you will have to maintain an MSAG until everyone is able to route off of the GIS data and do geospatial routing. And you may not be the person that's maintaining the MSAG, but someone is, and that is resource, money, time that you're putting into, in essence, maintaining a silo of data. So I would definitely recommend you drill into understanding it. Right now, those elements are still conditional in the data model for V3. Now, anything can change before it's put out there for and finalized. But I would urge you to understand that the reason those are in there is if you are going to produce a geospatially derived MSAG. As you are moving towards the transition of 911 data, as your NGCS system matures, the ultimate goal will be that you are not hosting a 911 database, that you will be able to make an FCC phase 2 request, and the originating service providers will be hosting their own 911 data. In order to get there, there's a lot of remediation work that has to be done in those ALI databases to ensure that when those records can or become part of a list, that they can do an LVF validation. So part of that process with many of the people on this call is to leverage those legacy elements to do some initial validation between the ALI and the GIS data. I see Carrie has something to add too.
Yeah, sorry, my camera's all wonky. I do. So one of the things that is really, I will say, driving a lot of this as well is the FCC report and order for the report and order 2478, which is the request now to start moving to spatial call routing, end-to-end spatial call routing, which means that your GIS data really does need to be in the proper format, not just having PSAP boundaries and an MSAG in place, but also having all of your required GIS data layers ready to do full spatial call routing. And when your jurisdiction, region, state puts in the request to the FCC and your OSPs, it's really for phase 1, 6 months to get for the OSPs to start delivering that data, and then another 6 months for phase 2. Now that's different than phase 1 and phase 2 E911 calls, but that's a fairly short order to have all of your GIS data really ready to do full spatial call routing. And Sandy, I think that that's really driving a lot of people today to, I'll say, get their ducks in a row, if you will. Right?
Yeah, because there's a cost benefit. There's a cost benefit to that. You're not paying for this information. You're not paying someone to maintain an MSAG. You're not even paying for 911 databases anymore, but there's a transitional element to that. And so that's where I would say understanding why this stuff is in there is just as important as looking at, is it required or is it not? Because you may find that it is something that's required in order for you to get to that end state goal that you want to get to.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, perfect. And who has any follow-up questions about that? All right, so the next session was June 12th, and GEOCOM reviewed NextGen 911 fundamentals and the importance of standards and best practices for building and maintaining high-quality GIS data. Again, I messed up the recording on that, so we do have a recording that Jessica graciously redid, but we don't have the live questions for that. So does anybody on the call have any questions from that session that you were, when you were there live, or that you reviewed on the recording? All right, then the next session was July 10th session. The Datamark presented NextGen 911 for everyone and NextGen 911 GIS boundaries. So the first question for Datamark from that session was, does GIS have the ability to autofill data from schema?
Yeah, so I'll take that one. So it really depends on kind of how you're set up, right? So if you're, and I'm going to use Esri because I think a number of us are primarily Esri based. Okay, regardless whether you're using QGIS or Esri, you can do, certainly spatial queries to make the determination of what should actually be filled out in those contents, right? So it depends on which field you're completing. Field calculations, of course, if you want to be, bulk calculating. So let's say you determine, a specific county or something, you can do bulk calculation for that. But in terms of actually coming up with a process for that, you can develop like an in-house script that you utilize. I will say the caveat to that is if you have somebody in your agency who is, a GIS programmer who's really good with developing scripts, and you rely heavily on them to develop a script for you, just come up with a plan just in case that person decides to leave or if they go on vacation, because something minor can potentially break a script if you're utilizing that to complete your fields. You can also use, I know for Esri, there's like attribution rules and domains. That just kind of helps to avoid, fat fingering, coming up with more of a systemic process for filling out those fields. And then additionally, a number of the vendors on the call today, we offer products and services that are specifically for NG911 validations. So that gives you QA and QC tools to ensure that not only are you able to fill out those fields appropriately, but that those fields, the contents of them, play well with your other NENA required layers. Because that's really important, right? As you're filling out your address point layer and maybe do some bulk calculations there, you want to ensure that the contents of those fields also align and play well with like your road centerline layer to make sure that whether you're, routing a call based off of the address point layer or the RCL layer, that those two layers drive. So again, it's not just completing the field, it's make sure that they're completed well with accurate, clean data. That's my official response.
Awesome, Lauren, thanks. Do we have anything else from our other panelists to add? All right, the next question from that session was, what are some of the highlights or changes between Data Model 2 and Data Model 3 to be aware of?
Sure. So I'm just going to kind of keep it really high level, but basically it's an alignment with i3 version 3. As I understand it, now I'm not part of this working group, but we have other members at Datamark that are. There was a big overhaul in version 3. So I think initially the intention was to space things out over a couple different versions, but they've included a bunch of different things. So I know there's an alignment with the i3 version 3, introduction of county fields, redefinition of elevation, altitude, and height attributes, and then updated domain values and stricter validation rules. So that's really high level, but of course, I extend the invite to any of the other panelists if they want to add more details. It looks like Sandy has some to add.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting additions, I would just say interesting, because I think we're all going to have to explore how this gets used in core services, is the addition of a site structure polygon in addition to a site structure address point. So the attribution is the same between the two, but one of the things that we kind of keyed in on when this started coming out and really thinking about it is the ability to use a indoor map that is CLDXF compliant within a LVF to validate with subaddress information. So one of the things that's going to be probably your biggest pain point when you are trying to go to that phase 2 FCC that we were talking about is there is a requirement for MLTS providers and VoIP providers, anything with a subaddress, that may be something that you require to be validated in an LVF. What that would mean is you'd have to have an address point layer that also has a relationship to all of your subaddress elements, which can be really costly and expensive. What you may have is you may be building a repository out of indoor maps, and I know that there's people on this call that are doing that. So I mention this just because I think this is a super valuable thing to make the 911 folks and GIS folks aware of, is that as that information gets built out, the digital derivatives from that technically could be a site structure polygon. And then being able to use that information both for dispatching and tactical mapping, but then also in your core services, it becomes you're kind of future-proofing the investment that you're making in indoor mapping. And I think it actually increases the need to have more indoor mapping and to have, indoor mapping of, pretty much anything that you have a a multi-unit building for. We don't do that, but I thought I'd just build that out because I think that's a super important differentiator, for V3.
Sandy, you bring up a really good point. The site structure polygon is, I will say, the first step to an indoor mapping data structure. There is a working group that is working on building out an indoor data model. I will say this, though, that the site structure polygon doesn't necessarily have to represent an indoor space. It could represent a site as well. Something that doesn't just have a single point to it, but an area to it as well, like potentially like a park, not just a building. So it can be a little tricky to get your mind wrapped around a little bit. I worked on that particular subgroup to get that built out, and so it does take a little bit of different thinking. But it is really cool, and it's going to be very exciting. We are working on the requirements for the indoor data model as well. The other thing, not that this is specifically of, I will say, value in Colorado, but version 3 of the data model also includes a lot of integration with CLDXF Canada and the internationalization of the data model as well. So that will actually lead into more of future work with like Forest Guides for being able to transfer calls internationally as we move forward.
All right, awesome discussion. Thank you guys so much. Any other questions on that particular topic before we move to the next session? All right, we actually had no questions recorded from the GeoComm session that was on August 14th, which was Advanced GIS Data Handling for NextGen 911, Indoor Data Creation, and Sub-Address Management. Did anybody have any questions that they wrote down to bring to the panel if they were there or watched the recording? All right, the next session was One Spatial session on August 20th. That was the NextGen 911 GIS data model and transition. And the question that we had from that session was, are there any states that have been able to move away from the tabular MSAG? And I think you touched on this a little bit earlier, Sandy, but did you have more to add?
I would say that the tabular MSAG is going to be around for a while. I think what you have to really kind of decide internally is, do you want to shift over to a geospatially derived MSAG, which means we'll take your address points, your road center lines, create an MSAG from that. It can be done anytime the data is updated. And I know, most of the people on this call have the capacity to do that. So, it's just something that's pretty common. It comes with most systems. Or do you want to continue maintaining a separate tabular MSAG? The truth is, what's going to drive the change away from that really is going to be more people making that phase 2 FCC request. Until we move people off of the dependency upon legacy 911 data bases, we are not going to be able to get away from maintaining them. Really, that there isn't many states that I know of that have a stick to be able to enforce to our telecommunication providers the structure of the data that they're going to send into the system. They've been sending it into and submitting it to our ALIC database, providers for 40 years in the same format. So really, the way to get away from an MSAG is to be moving towards getting your data to the point that you as a 911 authority can make an FCC phase 2 request. And to Carrie's point, that still has a lag time from when you make that request to when you kind of flip that switch But the other kind of decision point up until that's going to be, do you want it to be derived from GIS or do you want to maintain a separate tabular MSAG? So those are kind of the two decision points, that are out there for those who are thinking about getting away from a tabular 911 database.
Awesome. And it looks like Lauren has something to add.
Yeah, so for like a literal translation of that question, as far as I know, states that are getting closest to that point, I think Arizona is doing a really good job. So, if you have questions on that, you could probably reach out to like Brooke Serpa or Caleb Keener, because I think that Arizona has made a lot of progress in getting to that point and getting away from the MSAG. So if you really want to have a specific state, I think Arizona might be a good one to check out.
Massachusetts might be another one too.
Mhm.
Lauren, I know Massachusetts actually does have an active LVF stood up. And a quick note about Massachusetts, they have state statute in Massachusetts that requires MLT, so I'll explain. MLTS provider, that is your multi-line telephone system. So anytime you deploy in a campus, in a hospital, in a school, anytime you're deploying a phone system that has multiple lines attached to one kind of VoIP server, we would consider that an MLTS system. And there are laws, Ray Baum's Act is one of them, that requires the MLTS provider to maintain a database of the physical location of every single device that's attached into that system. So that's where that subaddress bit comes into place. Well, they are in Massachusetts, they have a state law that says they have to validate those databases against the state LVF. So they have a state-run GIS. They have they manage all of the data. They are trying to create a address point layer that has that one-to-one relationship so that the MLTS providers can continue doing that. But they also have all this information online. So if you're kind of interested in a preview of what you may kind of encounter when it comes to this process, you can go on to, Massachusetts has a website. They also have a naughty list of every MLTS provider who is not participating. And then they have a list of all the facilities that are impacted by those providers not participating. So they're not really playing games with this, but it is the extent that they've had to go to get compliance with even state statute.
Great information, and thank you for the example states that we can look to who are leading the way on this. Any follow-up questions from that discussion? All right. The last presentation we had was September 11th, doc breakdown with Lauren's excellent pop culture jokes in the presentation. I did not have any questions recorded from this. However, if you had questions that you had in the session or from watching the recording, please bring them forward.
And congratulations if you made it to the end of it, because it was so data intensive. So thank you if you did get through it.
Yes, you did take a very intense, deep dive topic and make it fun. So I was seriously impressed, Lauren. Thank you.
We tried.
All right. Well, the next section is you have a very highly esteemed panel of GIS subject matter experts in front of you. And so now is the time for you to ask any question you have about GIS and 911. While you're gathering your thoughts, I want to take another opportunity to thank these amazing GIS professionals. They are the ones who put together this GIS informational series for Colorado 911. We couldn't have done it without them, and we don't have reactions in our Zoom calls anymore, thanks to hackers. But if we did, I'd be sending giant rounds of applause and the little confetti and everything, because I'm super grateful to everybody who took the time to present to us. So with that, what questions do you have for these amazing professionals that you have here?
And if you don't come up with any questions, we'll start telling bad dad jokes. Or I guess
You
mom
might
jokes.
want to hear those. Who's got questions? Patty?
Well, yeah, it's not so much on the technical side, it's on the output side. So, and I'm making this assumption, and maybe it was already covered, that, eventually GIS will be able to identify areas that have the highest risk of emergencies, or the best locations to put the new firehouse in, or the impact that a new development might have in the community as it relates to emergency response. So that's part one. And then part two is, how difficult will that be to eventually extract, or are you going to need a GIS specialist to do it?
Which one wants to jump in on that first?
I was going to say, so Patty, in a prior life, many careers ago, I did a sub-consulting job down in South Carolina, where they said, well, we want to know where we may need to place some new EMS, agencies. And so in order to do that, we had to pull 5 years of calls for service from the CAD system, normalize all that data, figure out all the different response time, fractals. Then we had to take the calls and attempt to geocode them, which is convert the location of those calls into a point, and then try and do heat maps based upon, whether it's types of calls for medical, or the just concentration of calls for medical, but also then look at the response times to some of those, hotspot areas from the existing stations. And I think that's kind of where you're going, right? How do we use GIS, but also how do we use some of this historic information that's probably in your CAD system to try and come up with this. So that was maybe 12 years ago that I did that study, and I had to do all of it manually. Now, there might be some people on the call who have systems that are actually smart enough to normalize a lot of this data and pull it out for you and be able to create some of these, heat maps on the fly. But I do think that having someone who has a GIS capacity help you do that is going to just help you come up with the answers to the questions you have. I think the most helpful thing, though, from having been, on the side of doing that type of work, knowing what questions you're looking to get answers to going in makes it so much easier for us, because then we can help identify, okay, what data do we need, all that kind of stuff. But that's at least been my experience. And I don't know if there's a really good solution yet. I still think having a sound GIS professional by your side, or someone, that you can bring in even as a consultant might still be your best bet.
I would echo what Sandy is saying. Knowing what you want to get out of a project is half of the battle. And then having somebody, whether it is in-house or a consultant, to be able to help walk you through that is definitely going to enhance that project and the outcomes. Jessica?
So I think Lauren might have had her hand up before. So go ahead, Lauren.
Oh, thank you, Jessica. Just real quick. Sandy had mentioned normalizing the data. Just for those who are not super GIS savvy, that can be a huge undertaking. So and I know it was mentioned as part of the process, but normalizing the data can be a huge undertaking. And so tying this back to kind of where we are today with NG911 and the GIS focus there, cleaning up your GIS data today actually lends itself to this future goal of analyzing the GIS data and getting the most out of it for like routing optimization, like hotspot analysis and things like that. So I just wanted to mention that, especially because if you're in a position to maybe, if you can eliminate like stacked RCL geometries, right? Because if we are assigning like traffic patterns and things to stacked geometries, you might have a diluted result, right? So if your goal is in the future to analyze the previous 5 years or 3 years of GIS data, cleaning it up today is actually going to help you achieve that goal in the future. So just wanted to add that. Jessica, go for it.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to just tie back to the presentation I had done back in June with SOP development, workflow development, and documenting things. This is another place where you can do some brainstorming with everyone that would be involved. You want your GIS professional, but also the people that really know where these incidents are happening, the ones that are taking the calls or dispatching for them, responding to them specifically, that you make a plan for how you could use this GIS data so that you can go back to what Lauren said. If you standardize it now, then you'll be ready when someone comes to you and asks those questions and wants to know where to build the new fire stations or any responder units. Thanks.
Wow, Patty, your question generated some awesome discussion. Jeff?
So I just want to pose a question. We have two major projects undergoing statewide in the 911 community where we're discussing one, our existing tariff posture and our basic emergency service provider and trying to reach out and gather information as to whether there might be alternatives to our existing way of operating 911 in the state. And I'm thinking the GIS might be a way to help this initial perspective or dialogue that we have, kind of putting in perspective what the existing transport system is throughout the state and what kind of, I guess, information for potential suitors might face coming into the state if they wanted to offer services under a different model. And I just thought I'd throw that out there and see if you guys have encountered anything else like this elsewhere in your travels. And then the second project is we have a digital trunk radio system throughout the state that is in need of funding. And so we're looking at different funding models. This involves legislators and 911 community and public safety people and how we in the future fund this system. Some of it's aging, needs to be replaced. Again, there's a transport aspect. There may be some duplication, synergies within the state that we need to ferret out. And so that too, in my mind, might be another place where we could start with some GIS analysis going forward. I hand it over to you.
Sandy, you've got your hand up first.
Sure. So Jeff, before I came back to the private sector, I was the 911 program manager in Minnesota, and we did our conversion of our ingress network. And so we didn't pay for 911 in the new way with tariffs, but our old way of paying for 911 transport was all done through tariffs. And what they left in place was cost recovery still in tariffs. So we were paying all of our OSPs, distance-based transport tariffs just to route the call to the legacy selective router, even though we had an EZNet, we had POIS, we had all that. Trying to get that changed ended up in the Public Utilities Commission realm with a complaint petition because they were trying to pass tariffs for IP-based transport. So I think that you're thinking in the right direction, which is, I think that there's some things you can pay with a tariff, but there's also some things that in this shift to next gen 911, it doesn't lend itself elegantly to that tariff-based, system and approach. So at least that was my experience in Minnesota, but I would also point to the fact that California does pay for everything in 911 based upon tariff. So if you look at, and most of that documentation is available, they pay for GIS on tariff. They pay for, legacy, they pay for LDB, they pay for all of their core services system on tariff. So, I don't know how that works well for the vendor. I don't know if the vendor community likes it as much. We're not directly involved in any of those projects, but it is an example of how someone has been able to continue using the tariff-based approach to pay for some of these, non-traditional kind of next-gen systems.
One of the other areas that for years I thought there ought to be a better mechanism is, in Colorado, we collect for prepaid phones at point of sale. And then we also, collect the ETC surcharge based on subscriber addresses. But
Mhm.
there's no mechanism at all for capturing the transient populace that traverses Colorado, that hits all of our tourist areas, et cetera, et cetera. And it would seem to me that with the EZNet, there could be a better mechanism of also trying to capture some kind of vigorish for those people also. So I don't know if you've had any experience with that or anybody's put thought into that.
No, I think that's a real slippery slope. I'm sure you guys deal with the same thing though in Colorado. We would deal with things where people who lived in the borders between us and North Dakota or South Dakota would go across the border, buy a prepaid phone there. They'd have a North Dakota phone number, but they lived in Minnesota. And we were not getting the 911 fees for it, but they were actually burdening our 911 system for the majority of the calls that came in. But North Dakota was getting the fees for it. So it's a really, I think that's going to be a really difficult problem to try and solve. And I think it's going to be one that would probably require working more with the carriers on that, to get them to align better with, and possibly legislation. Do you want to be collecting fees from the phones that are burdening your network? Because that's really where the cost is coming in, to your point. Or do you want to be, or do you, does it balance out? Because we had the same thing. I mean, in the winter months, our population in the northern part of Minnesota would, exponentially increase over the summer months. But so definitely it's not a problem, unfortunately, that I know of many people that have been able to tackle.
Great. Thank you for those thoughts.
Great
That also
discussion.
sounds like
Go ahead,
a
Carrie.
federal issue, and that doesn't sound like it would be an easy thing to, I like your facial expression, Sandy. Doesn't sound like it would be an easy thing to resolve at the federal level at
No,
all.
the wireless carriers are not going to, I mean, the wireless carriers by and large just feel very burdened by a lot of unfunded mandates and unfunded, things that are put on them. I think that, I'll put a pitch here. I think helping them out with having to not maintain dispatchable location databases. We might find the wireless carriers are a little bit more open, to working on some of this, but that's actually probably more of a bigger issue right now. I'll just bring this up as kind of a topic, Jennifer. So, wireless carriers, legally have to maintain a dispatchable location database. I've talked to many of them. I won't name who, but typically they're just maintaining cell tower locations. That's all it is. And we know a lot of those are fake locations. They're not even real addresses, and it's not even information that is intelligence that a telecommunicator uses when the 911 call comes in. They're just, they're looking at their rapid SOS, their rapid deploy, or they're asking for the location. But there's a lot of cost and money that goes into maintaining that. Add a phase 2 request from the FCC and them having to turn that dispatchable location into a CLDXF address, they're not going to do it. And so it's really going to start gumming up our systems when we're having to transport, non-traditional, non-CLDXF locations from 80% of the 911 calls through the network. I think that there's other ways that dispatchable location can be gleaned from all the great GIS data that we're creating. All the companies that are here, I think, are super innovative. And there's ways that we could, get that information to a better address to you guys. But right now, relying upon the wireless carriers to do that, I think, if you really talk to them, it's definitely something that has a huge cost burden to them and may make them a little apprehensive of tackling some of these other issues.
Carrie, did you have something to add?
Nope.
Great questions, Jeff. Who else has questions? Rachel,
Hi, can you hear me?
we can.
Hi, thanks to everyone on the call today. So being a local control state out in the great American West here, we seem like we're lagging behind in some ways on the readiness at the aggregated state level behind places like Massachusetts and even North Dakota. And so I know, not to put them on the spot, but I do see Daryl and Matt on this call today. And so I'm wondering if others on the call are wondering about the Colorado 911 Resource Center's Phase 1 GIS project and how we're going to use that as a way to steer our turning of the Titanic, so to speak. I'd love to hear a little bit of reflection on this Phase 1 project. And then secondly, the creation and delivery of a statewide NextGen 911 GIS data gap analysis of our governing bodies is part of the Colorado 911 Resource Center's GIS project requirements. And so that still leaves a lot of room for the recipe by which we do it at both the PSAP or authority level, all the way up through the regional and to the state level. So, I mean, we could probably spend another several hours just talking about what I've just brought up, but I'd love to hear some thoughts on that in our remaining time. That's my pseudo question.
Well, Daryl, Connie, and or Matt, who would like to take the point on that one?
Matt, shall you or shall I? How about I start and then you can jump, you can tell me where I got it wrong.
Yeah, that was my suggestion.
Okay. So that was a loaded question, a lot of parts to it, but the Resource Center project is basically just build a statewide PSAP boundary layer, as well as potentially an authoritative boundary layer. And funding that is left over will be used to assist local agencies. And we don't know exactly what that's going to look like at this time, but assist local agencies that need it with additional GIS work. And the contract for that is still being finalized by OIT, who is doing the purchasing for the Resource Center. That is a one-time project. It does not include any ongoing maintenance. So obviously that is not going to be the end of the picture. But the other tool that we now have in place is the 911 Services Enterprise, which was created by a bill passed last year. The enterprise has set its 911 enterprise fee, which will be part of the 911 surcharge starting in January of 2026. And that enterprise can spend money on any number of 911 related projects and services or grants on a statewide basis, including GIS. So as far as the funding necessary for ongoing GIS maintenance or GIS support to local agencies, that is another tool that we now have in our belt, because we are aware that there is a lot of work to be done in Colorado regarding getting all of our GIS data to the point that it is robust enough for NextGen 911. And Matt, I'll just say I know just enough about GIS to use the terms incorrectly, so Matt can correct what I just said.
I'm glad you didn't call it GSI.
There you go. I can't even spell GIS.
It's all good. I think you nailed it, Daryl. I would just add from my perspective only, I feel like Colorado's in a good place. Our 911 authorities here have never been ones to want to be early adopters or late adopters. And I think from a statewide perspective, we're in a good place. Certainly, there are those of us who have been chomping at the bit for a long time with GIS data ready to go for GIS-based routing in one form or another. But statewide, I think we're okay. We just need to keep eating the apple one bite at a time on the GIS data preparation. And, part of that means that we have to create circumstances that will compel folks who've been waiting to get off the sidelines on doing their GIS data improvement or creating it.
Thanks, Matt and Carrie.
Yeah, I would say this. Colorado certainly may not be on the leading edge with regards to this rollout, but you certainly are not by any stretch of the imagination, just to kind of follow what Daryl and Matt said. You certainly are not lagging behind in any excessive way either. I live in Indiana. We are, say, maybe one of the top 3, top 5 when it comes to next gen implementations. But like Colorado, we are a home rule state, so we don't necessarily have a ton of cohesiveness when it comes to getting all of the counties fully together. So although we are moving forward, there's still a lot of that conversation at the local level to bring it up to the statewide level that is happening. And you're not any further behind than I would say anybody else. So don't feel frustrated. Don't feel like you are super far behind, because you really aren't. As long as you're working at the local level, getting your ducks in a row, that will all roll up to the state level. That's my rah-rah sis boom bah pitch for you, Rachel.
Thanks, Carrie. Sandy, and then Matt.
Yeah, and I also wanted to add, so I think one thing that's important is there are states that have, deployed an EZNet, or even have deployed, that has transitional capabilities that's still using MSAG and ALI. That's actually where Minnesota's at. We did the GIS project when I was there and are ready to turn the lights on with core services, but now the state has, kind of decided to go back to the drawing board and go back out to bid again for core services. So it's not necessarily that there's one order to go in. I think that some states, though, also that have gone to core services, they have a hybrid approach to switching over to geospatial call routing. So in a transitional state, you can actually be doing both, using GIS, depending on your system provider, GIS and the tabular data at the same time while people are making that transition. So I think it's just a matter of, you guys have really good local coordination and advocacy. You're giving your state leaders like Daryl really good advice. Working together down that path, then you'll make the decisions about what makes the most sense for Colorado. And also based upon your funding and your kind of, organizational structure. Being home rule can have its benefits. It can also sometimes make it a little more difficult. So, really all of those factors have to come into play, not just the GIS piece.
Thanks, Sandy. Matt?
Great points. If your agency or your GIS partners haven't yet started on, say, for example, structure address points, site structure address points, the best time to start them was probably 5 or more years ago. It can be a long process to fully develop those to where they're at a life safety grade of data, if you will, good enough for public safety services. And so if you're not, definitely get started right away.
Really good point. All right, in the 4 minutes that we have left, I will just go back to each of our subject matter experts and see if they have any final thoughts that they want to leave us with. And Becky, I don't want to leave you out. Did you have anything to add to the group? And thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, just one final thought maybe would be to never underestimate the importance of developing a good workflow. So once you get to that point of having your GIS data and in next gen standards, it's not okay, set it on the shelf. It's done and it's over with. We can walk away. So taking a look at what it takes to update, to maintain, and to take your GIS data and have a good workflow developed. I think that's what a lot of the what Jessica Byerman had presented on in the recorded session. So I just want to kind of highlight that importance.
Thanks, Becky. And I'll turn it over to Jessica. I love how the
Sorry.
mute button is in a different place on every single meeting platform.
It just disappeared on me, so it didn't show, so it took a second. No, I don't really have anything else to add. I just appreciate having the opportunity to do that presentation back in June, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how Colorado moves forward with their efforts. Thanks.
Thank you. We really appreciated your session. Lauren.
Yeah, I think those are great points too. Focusing on your workflow, keeping maintenance in mind, identifying the stakeholders, getting them involved in the conversation. So, I always tell people, if you have an addressing coordinator that's outside of your PSAP, maybe bring them into the PSAP, let them see how their data is being utilized so that as they're creating more addresses, they are good, viable public safety addresses. It's kind of like stopping the bleeding, Yeah, so again, feedback loops and open communication channels, I think that's the biggest thing. So
Awesome. Thank you so much. Sandy?
Yeah, so two things, building a little bit on what Lauren just said. Also, pay attention to your addressing workflow. So when does an address become an address? Who is responsible for creating addresses? Do you have multiple jurisdictions that have authority to create addresses under your PSAP service area? Getting that in order right now before you even try and build an address point data set is probably, that's an actionable item right now. That's just really going to help you going forward. Because that will help you, especially when you're doing a lot of this data remediation work, is to know who these people are, because you may have to go back to them because the information the OSP sends, they're getting from their customer. Well, that could be an address that's a vanity address that they were allowed to use by the U.S. Postal Service that does not reflect an address that's in your local, county or city registry. So all these things kind of matter to create that ecosystem of I call it a better together approach. You've got to work with kind of everyone to do this. The second thing is don't stop your education on what's going on the GIS and the 911 side. I do not work for NENA, but probably one of the most satisfying events you can go to is Standards and Best Practices. That is in New Orleans in January. And at the end of that this year, they are doing a critical issues forum that is solely 2 days focused on GIS. So I highly recommend, probably the people you see on this call, we will all be there to some form or fashion. And I can't recommend more getting engaged and involved and just finding your people that if you've got a question about something, you can kind of send them an email and say, hey, can you help me out with this? Because I think there's a lot of us that are out there that we just want to help, make this as smooth as possible.
Awesome. Thank you. And last but not least, Carrie.
Yeah, I agree with what everybody here has said. They've all kind of taken the words right out of my mouth, especially what Sandy said about the Critical Issues Forum in New Orleans. And who doesn't want to go to New Orleans in January, right? It'll be hopefully warmer and it'll definitely be less snowy than Colorado. There's going to be a lot of great information presented. The other thing that I would say is everybody that has spoken here today has a different business that we work in, but we all have the same common goal, which is to help all of you meet your end goals, which is to ensure that the citizens of your community have the best GIS data in place to ensure that your 911 spatial call routing is in place to help save lives. So don't be afraid to reach out to any one of us to help you out. Yes, we are all in business competitors, but we're also all friends outside of this realm. So we're all working for the same common goal.
Thank you so much, and thank you all, and thank you very much to OneSpatial, Datamark, and GeoComm for this excellent series this summer. We appreciate you guys being here. Thank you to everybody who participated in the series, and this will be recorded and placed onto our YouTube channel for review. So thanks for your time, everybody. Have a fantastic day, and hopefully see you at the Critical Issues Forum in January.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.